Good afternoon. The Aero Club of Washington, D.C. Runway Program, in partnership with Women in Aviation International YoPro Connect, is pleased to present today's webinar, Pioneers in Aviation, with special guest Stephanie Chung, Chief Growth Officer at Wheels Up. My name is Kali Hague, and I'm chair of the Runway Program. The Runway Program connects young professionals across all aspects of aviation through networking and aviation events like today's webinar. Moderating with me is Gabrielle Palmas, who leads Women in Aviation's YoPro Connect. Gabby is the chair of YoPro Connect, which engages young professionals entering aviation or who are already in aviation. Aviation is a much more diverse industry than it was even just 10 years ago, but there are still very few Stephanies in the industry. Even fewer of them make it to the C-suite. Stephanie, we are delighted to talk with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me. I'm very much looking forward to it. This should be fun. So thank you very much.
So you've been on the cover of, it seems like, almost everything and all over my LinkedIn feed, and I really enjoy following your career. But you got started in a very interesting and maybe a way we wouldn't expect for someone who's wound up at the C-suite.
This is true. So what's really interesting is, and I love to tell this story because it really is, it goes with that saying, it doesn't, it's all about how you start out, right? So for me, I started out working for the airlines, loading luggage and parking planes and doing customer service at the ticket counter. So I absolutely loved that job. And I always say, if I could still make, great money there, I'd still probably be doing it because it was such a fun job. No 2 days were ever exactly the same. And I learned a lot. So that's how I started out. But, it's not about where you start. It's really about where you finish. And so obviously I'm thrilled to be Chief Growth Officer for Wheels Up as well.
Great. Well, we have a poll going right now, so if you haven't answered, please do. We'd love to know what our audience is in aviation. Are you a young professional? Are you new to the industry or not quite in it? Right now, we have a number of responses coming in. Most people are professionals in aviation, and we have about 20% that are identifying as young professionals or 40 and under in the industry.
Nice. And my favorite group. I love them. I wish I was 40 and under again.
So Stephanie, you recently began a significant leadership role with Wheels Up after your presidential role at Jet Suite. What do you enjoy most about the world of business aviation?
It's interesting. And this would be true for whether it's business aviation or when I was in the airlines. I've been in the business of aviation for well over 35 years, some of it, a big portion of that in the airlines and a bigger portion of that in general aviation. And one of the things that I love about aviation, and I always tell people, especially if they're new in this space, is that we are an intricate part of someone's story. And a lot of times I don't think we always think of it that way. But I love it, right? Because if someone's flying, whether they're flying on an airline, they're flying privately, they're flying because something's important enough for them to get on a plane. So whether it's they're trying to go close a big deal, or maybe they're going to go see their new grandbaby for the first time, or maybe they're going for cancer treatment, or there's just taking some family time together to reconnect with their loved ones. Whatever it is, if you're getting on a plane, it's significant enough for you to get on a plane, right? So one of the things I love about being in our space is the fact that we are part of everybody's story. Now, it's interesting, as a leader, one of the things I like to share with the teams, always, any team I've ever led, is we're part of the story, but we also have the opportunity to control the narrative, right? So are we going to be a good part of this story or a bad part of the story? Because we're a part of the story regardless. And so we have control of how we actually, show up, if you will, so that when they get off of our aircraft, they're either talking about what a great experience it was or not, right? But what I love about our space is the fact that every single trip, every single person, they have a story, and we get to be a part of it.
That's, I've never heard someone describe business aviation that way, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It changes your perspective. Like once you look at it that way, it's very different than, just fly a plane or load luggage or it's another trip or, whatever. It's like when you really understand the magnitude of what it is that we're doing, I truly believe it will change how you interact with your clients, how you interact with your peers, how you interact with everybody. It all changes. So yeah, we're part of the story. It's a cool job that we've all got in aviation.
So, and with, from where you are now, starting as a ramp agent, you've been part of that story in very different roles throughout your career. So I
Yes.
know you played a big role in sales and really brought some new ideas and interesting things about sales to the industry. And some of that you learned from Mary Kay, which might surprise some of our audience, that selling makeup and now working at Wheels Up seem to have worked really well together for you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I know if you were at the Women in Aviation conference last year, I think I was one of the keynotes for the last day of the event. And I told my Mary Kay story because it's such a crazy story, but it makes people laugh because I was a disaster in Mary Kay. But I did know sales and I learned sales. And there's certain things that I learned in that whole Mary Kay experience that I am so grateful for and that I carry with me every single day still now as a professional that's no longer obviously selling makeup. For those of you who didn't hear the story, I, got out of the aviation space for a little bit of time because I needed to, really reprioritize what was going on in my life. I was working for the airlines at one point and I was in sales and I was traveling 270 days a year. So I was hardly ever home. And that was great when I was young and single. But once I became married and had a baby, obviously I was not able to sustain that type of travel schedule. So I stepped out of the business for a little bit to kind of reassess and figure out, well, is this the career for me? And should I be perhaps doing something different? And while I was out, kind of in that moment of trying to just decide what's next, a friend of mine sold Mary Kay. And I didn't wear makeup. I didn't, I washed my face with just plain old water and soap. And so I knew nothing about makeup. And yet, your best friend's always your biggest cheerleader, right? So she's like, you should go sell Mary Kay. I'm selling Mary Kay. And she's telling me about this Mary Kay, which I'd never heard of before. And all I heard her say though, was you could win a car. That's all I ever heard her say. And so I was like, I could win a car. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'm not working and I have a car payment. So if I could get rid of the car payment, then, now we're on to something, right? So that was my motivation, getting into Mary Kay. And I ended up winning a car 5 weeks later. I ended up winning 5 cars, being number 10 in the world. It was crazy. But all of that because I knew how to sell. And so I say that story. And the reason what sticks with me still to this day from a Mary Kay perspective is I learned a couple of things there. One, some of the advice that I would tell anybody in their career is go figure out how to sell something. Go sell something. Even if you don't see that as a lifelong career, go sell something, because what you learn in sales, those types of competencies will literally help you throughout life, right? Help you be a better person, better connector, better parent, better leader, better everything. Because sales teaches you some things that you can't get anywhere else but in sales, right? So that would be the very first thing that I learned, because in Mary Kay, you're 100% commission. If you don't sell something, you don't make any money. And then also because I led teams in Mary Kay, so they were 100% commission, but they were a team that I recruited and I now had a responsibility to lead and develop. I couldn't fire them, right? And so in order for me to be successful, I had to learn how to grow and develop and mentor and teach people for them to hit their own level of success, because that was the only way I was going to win this car, which again, that was my mission, right? Only way I was going to win the car was to have a slew of people underneath me who were successful in their own business. And so learning how to lead and be a leader that knows how to develop people, in my opinion, is what separates the good from the great, right? There's a lot of people that have leadership titles out there. Not a lot of people who are great leaders, in my opinion. But if you want to be a great leader, the basics is to really understand how to spot talent. First, you got to lead yourself. Let's start there. You have to be able to be disciplined. You have to be able to, be focused on what it is you're trying to get accomplished. But when you're looking to develop people, it's important that you understand what their talents, their gifts, their superpower is. And then your job is to really work with them, communicate with them to make sure that you're growing them in their superpower, not someone else's superpower, in their superpower. So I learned all of that, strangely enough, in Mary Kay. So yeah, it was a crazy story, and I don't know why anybody would ever buy makeup for me when I didn't wear makeup. I always tell people it's like going to a dentist with no teeth, right? I had a ton of people buying makeup from me, but I also had a great group, and I ended up learning a lot about how to develop people and how to lead and how to be disciplined. And so yeah, lots of different things that I learned in that short time that I was doing Mary Kay, but lessons that I would absolutely just take with me every day.
So walk us through a little bit about your current role. What is a Chief Growth Officer?
Yeah, so the Chief Growth Officer, thank you for asking that, actually, because it's not a position that you hear that often, but there are lots of them, out there, especially more on the big publicly held companies. So Chief Growth Officer, what we do for at least for Will's Upside, is me and my team look at everything from a diversity perspective. So there's really three things that we're focused in on. So the first one is growing, right? So growing our revenue stream from customers that have more of a diverse background. So for us, we're really focused in on, growing specifically our female clients, our people of color clientele, as well as our LGBTQ plus clientele. So from a revenue perspective, that's one form of growth. Another thing that we're focused in on is also growing our pipeline of diverse employees. Will's Up, we've got a good diverse, client or employee base, but, we know that as we continue to grow and as the industry continues to grow, how do we form a pipeline of more diverse, qualified, instrumental, new entrants into the space and into our pipeline specifically. But also we want to do it to help the entire industry as well with that. And then the third thing that we're really focused in on is social. What you don't want to do is go and just grab business from these particular vertical markets and not really give back and be in tune to what's important to them, right? So for Will's Up, social causes and philanthropic work is really important to us as a brand. And so that's a third piece that we do on the growth side is, making sure that our social responsibilities are there as well. But again, looking at it with a lens of diversification.
So when you talk about diversity and inclusion, and you talked about with Mary Kay identifying your team's superpower, not making them fit yours, making them fit their own, does that picture or does that process change at all when you're looking through this from a lens of let's have more diversity?
Yeah, so I don't know that it changes as much as, when you're, let's say as a leader, and, and this is why, let me just take one step back as well. Because I know there's a lot of young professionals on this webinar as well. Here's one of the pieces of advice I would give everybody, but especially young professionals who are moving up in their career. The one thing you want to do is when you're doing interviews with a company, make sure that since you're interviewing probably with the person who's ultimately going to be your manager or your supervisor or what have you, make sure that you are asking a lot of questions about their ability to develop people. A lot of times people don't do that. They go into an interview and they're sitting there and they're having questions asked of them. And the goal, of course, for any company is to see if you're going to be a good fit. But you yourself are bringing something to the table as well. And so what I would encourage everybody to do is make sure that you're asking questions to find out the person that you're reporting to, do they know how to develop people? If they have, what's been their greatest success story? What's been their most proudest moment when it comes to, people that they're really excited about, someone that worked for them, what they did step by step to develop them, and now where is that person now? So it's important that you take control of your career early on, because every decision that's ever being made about your career, you will not be in the room. That's the reality, right? So that's my little free, soapbox on that one, right? Now, fast forward back to your question, Kaylee, is it different? I don't know that I would say it's different, but what I would say is if you're in tuned, right? Because every person is different. So by default, there's a differentiation to it. So if I, am leading, Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? Well, they're all three different people with three different backgrounds, three different upbringings, three different perspectives, three different, everything. And so as a leader, and this is how you can tell true leaders, they're paying attention. They're not trying to make a one size fits all, but they're paying attention to Tom, Dick, and Harry's gifts and talents and superpowers, and they're adjusting accordingly. It is a myth that the whole team has to adjust to the leader. Really good leaders adjust to the individuals on the team. And so the way that I would lead, coach, develop, what have you, Tom, Dick, and Harry would be completely different, three different ways, because they're three different people with three different backgrounds, upbringings, and perspectives and talents, right? So I hope that's kind of a long way to answer your question, but there you have it.
That's great. And I want to remind for everyone who's tuning into this, there's a chat feature, which will either be on the bottom or right side of your webinar. Please ask questions along the way. This is an interactive conversation, as you can tell, and you can get some real-time feedback from Stephanie. So following up on that, and with diversity, so there aren't a lot of women in aviation, and there are even less people of color in aviation.
What? I hadn't noticed that, Kali. What is this? Yeah. What is this you speak of?
Maybe new to you. But I've noticed, my name's Kali. I think it's a fairly feminine name, but when I send emails, a number of times I'll get a response back that is addressed to Mr. Hague. And there's just this default of, what, I'm getting an email from someone in aviation, so it must be a guy. And so for someone who's interviewing who might not fit the stereotype in aviation, do you have suggestions for how you might kind of get through this initial and probably a bias that the interviewer isn't even aware of?
You know what? That's a really good question. That's a great question. My suggestion would be, it's funny, you and I were talking about this earlier before we went on camera, is to learn how to ask questions, and that's so important, because that's how you're going to help get through the bias or any question that you're not clear about, or people, because again, you're trying to actually help the person as well in this case, because they're not trying to be mean or intentional. They just, to your point, didn't know. And so what I would say is learn how to ask questions. So when someone asks you a question, or let's use that example, Kali, when let's say you're talking to the person and you're meeting them for the first time, and yet they've addressed it as Mr., right? And most likely you probably wouldn't meet with them because they didn't even take the time to figure out that you're a woman. But let's just say that you were meeting with them. Then a question you could ask is like, hey, I noticed that when you sent the email to me, you addressed me as Mr. I'm so curious. Why did you think I was a Mr.? Right? So learn how to ask questions. Questions are my superpower, for starters, right? I love good questions, because you'd be amazed in that case. Now imagine where that conversation could go using that example, Cal, right? That person then will tell you whatever the reason was that they thought you were a man. And now there's an opportunity there for you, not to embarrass the person, but of course to help them, get to that next level, right? So I'm big on, construction, just conversational intelligence is what I call it. And that really is all about being centered around asking questions, listening intently, and understanding, like, how can we have a conversation that's mutually beneficial, not one-sided, but mutually beneficial.
That's really interesting. I like that.
Can I ask you, Stephanie, a little bit more about decision-making? So when it comes to decision making, what have been some of the high points and low points throughout your career so far?
So, it's interesting. One of the things when I grew up, I grew up a military brat, right? So my dad was in the Air Force. He was a master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. And if you've ever known any of us military kids, we have a very interesting upbringing. And I loved the upbringing because it had to do with excellence. When you think about it, I was that kid that moved every 2 years of my life. I went from base to base to base, always active Air Force bases. And that's one of the reasons why I got into aviation. But being on a base, you're surrounded by soldiers, and their pants are always creased. They tend to be in very tip-top shape. They are very decisive, right? and of course can take orders and play as a team, know their role and play their role. When you think about decision making, I've been blessed because I had a father who was always wanting me to make a decision and make it quickly, right? And that's just, that was kind of part of who he was or who he is to this day as well. So decision making, the thing that I have learned is that the more you make decisions, the better you'll get at them. And the thing that's really important is not to beat yourself up if you make a bad decision, because God knows I've made a ridiculous amount of bad decisions, but I've also made a lot of good decisions as well. And I think sometimes what people get challenged by, especially when they're, moving up in their career, is there's like this, especially young professionals, hear me on this. There almost seems to be a trend right now of having to be happy, right? And I was talking to a friend of mine who runs an agency. We were having this conversation about happiness. People are becoming unhappy because they feel like they're supposed to be so happy, right? and it's ridiculous. The truth of the matter is every single day you've got to make decisions that make the most sense for you and your family or your career or what have you. Sometimes they're going to be good decisions. Sometimes they're going to be bad decisions. Personally, for me, anytime I've ever made a decision and it's been a bad one, what I don't do is beat myself up. What I do is step back and kind of reassess, why did I make the decision? How did I get to that point? And now what's the lesson I'm going to learn having made that bad decision? And then once I learn that lesson, right, I've decided, I've written it down. Okay, this was, food for thought or a note to self. Then I move on. I literally can tell you, I then forget about it and I move on. A lot of times what people do is when they make decisions, if they make good ones, they're happy. If they make bad ones, it's with them for the rest of their life, right? Or at least for weeks upon weeks upon weeks. And that's just wasted energy, wasted time, wasted focus. So what I would say is, for me, making decisions is important, but the more you make them, the better you'll get at them. And be okay with making decisions, knowing that it's not a decision that most likely is going to last forever. And it's not to infinity, right? If you make a bad decision, learn the lesson, move on, try not to make that same mistake again twice. So right. my answer there, Gab, is just learn how to make decisions and be okay with the decision that you made.
Yes, one of my favorite mentors taught me, so you're going at a decision. It's either this way or this way. And then once you make that decision, it's either this way or this way. Keep it simple and know that you always have the opportunity to improve as you go along. So
exactly. And even when you're raising kids, like my daughter, she'll tell you when she was little, I'd give her the opportunity to think through, like, I'll give you an example. I never made her lunch, right? A lot of parents probably have, woof. So as a little girl, I just didn't make her lunch. It is her decision, right? And so, I'd put categories, right? Here's a fruit, here's a vegetable, whatever. So she could pick from her certain little area. But that was a way early on to help her learn how to make decisions, right? Same thing. I never put her clothes out like you can get a shirt from here and pants from here, but whatever they are, but they are, right? And so all that so that she would learn how to make decisions. Because at the end of the day, life is nothing but a bundle of decisions, and some are going to be good, some are going to be bad. You're going to learn the lesson and move on. So yeah, don't beat yourself up over it. Make the decision and keep it moving. So when I'm talking to people that I lead or people that I mentor, what have you, when I can feel that they're in that place of indecisiveness, I'll always ask them, so what's your decision? Right? And that way, it's like whatever they decide, fine with me. Right? It's your decision. Exactly. But let's keep moving. So yeah, so train yourself on it. It's the best habit.
How do you balance that? Because as a manager, there are many decisions that your employees can make, or you really don't care, and it's really going to have zero impact for what they decide. Do you want a sandwich? Do you want a salad for catering? I mean, it'll be okay. But there are some decisions where maybe that decision's not huge, but if they choose option A over B, then the next two forks could be really pivotal for their career or you or the company. So how do you balance giving them the autonomy and encouraging them to decide, and also being that safety net of, okay, we're not going to screw up too much here?
Yeah. Well, okay, first of all, I can go, like, I love that question. So thank you very much. So now here's my secret sauce, right? First of all, when you're the manager in this case, Kali, right? Or when you're developing people, You're right. The fact of the matter is you will usually always make the better decision because that's why you're the boss, right?
Yeah.
But in order to be a leader who is a developer of people, what you want to do is you always do want to give them as much as possible, give them that ability to make the decision, whether it be a big one or a small one. Start off with the small ones first. Now you have to be mindful, right? Because if it's the first day on the job, they don't know enough, they don't know what they don't know, right? But assuming that they've been with you for, months, years, what have you, part of the challenge that we have as leaders is actually trusting our people enough to be able to allow them to make those decisions. The truth of the matter is sometimes they too are going to make decisions that are bad decisions, and you have to let them go through that, right? Because that's the only way. I remember my very first sales boss I ever had. I was 25 years old. I had a quota of $25 million. And I didn't, have a background in sales. And so I remember talking to her one time, and she and I had done a joint sales call together. And because she was there, I didn't do a whole lot of talking, right? My boss is there. It's, sales call. She can run this show, right? And I remember when we left, she asked me why I didn't say, because I was like, oh, you know what would have been a good question is this, or we should have said that, or whatever. And she's like, well, why didn't you say that? And I said, well, I didn't want to ask a question and seem stupid or ask the wrong question, And so she goes, I always want you to ask questions, but I especially want you to ask questions while I'm there because that helps me understand your thought process.
Oh, I love that.
Yes. And then once I know your thought process, then she can, tweak, develop, train, from there, right? That is something that I do as well now, with any teams. And I've been in the space a long time. There's probably a lot of people on this call that I've led or mentored or coached or something somewhere along the line. And that is something that I try to hold true to all the time. And so it will be sometimes, Kali, a big decision. You're right, where this could really, you're like, oh, please make the right one, right? Or it's a small one that really doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, the only way they're going to learn is for you to let them make those decisions. Now, what you can do so that you can, because you still have a responsibility as a leader not to, minimize as many bad decisions as possible, is, for any leader, if you can get really good at asking, and I always say, if you can ask 7 questions before you give them the answer, you're light years ahead of most leaders. 7 questions before you give them the answer. 7 questions is hard. Asking 1 or 2 questions is easy. It starts getting a little bit more challenging on 3 and 4. And when you start to get to 5, 6, and 7, it's damn near impossible. Okay. But when you get to that type of discipline as a leader, not only will you develop amazing talent and talent that will go on and they'll do amazing things, but it also will make your job a lot easier as the leader. Because now you've got a team full of rock stars versus a few rock stars, and you're having to carry the load, right? So I would just tell you that learn how to ask questions. So an example, Kali, would be if you're, one of your people, you've given them a project or whatever. So start asking them questions about, help me understand what ultimately you'd want to do here. Why would you want to do it that way? And if let's say you don't agree. Instead of saying, well, maybe, because this is what most leaders do. Well, maybe we should do this, right? Now, all of a sudden, they're starting to tell them the answer. Just say, it's interesting. Tell me more, right? Learn to fall in love with the simple phrase, tell me more. And the more you can get them telling you what they're thinking, how they go about it, you'd be amazed how usually they really can come up with the answer. It may not have been the way that you would have come up with it. It may be ugly, right? Maybe an ugly process how they got there. But the only way that they get better is by us creating that safe space that allows them to get better. Does that make sense?
It sounds like you're teaching through the process instead of saying, have you considered this? And then they're just going to consider it because you told them to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How did you consider this?
Yes.
And
yes.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. It's not easy. Trust me. I say it with, full transparency. It's not always easy. And it's not, sometimes you do have to just tell people the decision because you're on a time crunch and you've got to move on. But I would say that's probably, 1 to 2% of the time. It does take a lot longer to do that process I just told you. 7 questions is so much longer than me just telling you what to do, right? Me telling you what to do, it's going to take me 2 seconds, right? 7 questions could take me 20 minutes, right? But at the end of the day, not only will they be proud of themselves for, having, because they'll be, and that's important too, right? That they have their own wins and successes. But also now what will happen is I don't have to then have that same question presented to me later.
Mm-hmm.
And that will save me time in the long run.
So
go ahead.
Go ahead, Gabby.
Oh, I can feel it. This is getting good. I can feel it.
I was going to hop in basically to kind of continue on with this point. So a big thing that you hear about nowadays with young professionals is find a mentor, connect with a mentor. Do you have any advice, not only for us who are still finding our way in the industry, but for those of us who are now kind of established, like Kali and I are, and who are trying to mentor those coming into the industry?
Yes, yes. So know that there's a difference between mentors and sponsors. You do want to find a mentor for sure. And a mentor is just someone who's going to impart wisdom, is how I see it. And this is just my interpretation of mentorship versus sponsorship. So they're going to be there. They're going to give you, words of advice. And mentors are really important, especially throughout your career. A sponsor is a little bit different though. A sponsor is certainly going to do some mentorship qualities here and there, but they're also more importantly going to open the space for you. So a sponsorship has a vested interest in watching you succeed, and actually are going to help you succeed. So whether it's opening doors for you, introducing you to people, what have you, right? So sponsorship is very different. Now, the reverse is true too. If I'm talking to people who tend to mentor or whatnot, I'll also tell them about sponsorship also, because, there's only so much words of wisdom that you need. Somewhere along the line, you need someone to actually make an introduction, most likely, right? Or someone who can take that extra step. And so when you're a sponsor of someone, you get to know that person at a whole different level, which is really pretty cool too. And when we think about, like, right now, diversity and inclusion, sponsorship is really important as we look at diverse, whether it's employee bases or, friendships or what have you, because now you're getting to know the person, not what you think that person's like, but you're really getting to know that person at a whole different level. And that then helps you when you're trying to open doors for them or make introductions for them, et cetera. So that's the two difference. Now let's go back to the mentorship, because that's probably most common based on your question. Yeah. So what I would say in regards to mentorship is this, and this is going to sting a little bit. So sit down, people, get ready. A lot of times people will ask me for, people I don't even know, right? They'll send me on LinkedIn, hey, can you be my mentor? And the truth of the matter is the answer is always going to be no with that approach, for starters, because mentorship is really important. Mentorship means that you're asking the person to spend their time to help you. And most people are happy to do that. But, you want to make sure, like for me, I only have so much time, obviously, and I do mentor and sponsor and coach, a lot of people. But the thing that's really important is a lot of times I'll give people simple tests and they won't even know it's a test. And the reason why is people, when they think of mentorship, and don't fall into this, young professionals, a lot of times they'll just think of like, oh, there's a person I can just call and talk to. Well, first of all, that person's probably super busy already, right? So you want to be mindful of how you spend their time. And so if they ask you to do something, or they ask you a question, or they encourage you to do something, do it, right? So for me, I know, and this is more so early on, as I was starting to get a lot of people wanting to do mentorship. And so I just do a simple, like, it can be something so simple, like, oh, you know what? Well, let's talk about it a little bit more. So do me a favor, go ahead and just, set up time with my assistant and give me a buzz. And probably, next Thursday, probably, I think around, 2 or 4. And so it's just like, it seems like I'm just giving a random thing, but it's not random by any stretch, right? What I'm trying to do is see, do they follow up? Did they follow up at the time I was talking about? Did they follow up with talking to the assistant, or did they shoot me an email? Like, I'm trying to pay attention to, like, did they follow that simple instruction?
And I bet 9 times out of 10, the answer is no.
9 times out of 10, the answer is no. And so now what that means for me is I'm not wasting another second of my time on this person. Forget about the potential that they have, because potential doesn't mean anything, right? It's all about performance. And so if you can't follow those simple steps, then really what you're telling the people that you want them to spend their time is that your time's more valuable than theirs, right? So there's a whole lot when it comes to mentorship and sponsorship. So here's what I would say to people. If you want a mentor, you want to find out why you want that person as a mentor. I know for me, I can tell you a lot of times people will see, you see me on webinar, or you see, to your point, Kali, you see me, plastered all over some kind of media or something. But if you ask anybody that's ever been mentored by me, it is like not an easy process, okay? Because I'm going to hurt your feelings because we're trying to get some stuff accomplished, right? And so what that means is I'm going to love you enough to give it to you straight. I'm not your mom. I'm not going to, give you cuddles and hugs so that you feel good, right? The point is you're trying to get from here to here. And I've gotten there. And so I can tell you the easiest way to get there, but it's not going to be the easiest way as far as steps, not the easiest way as far as process. And so it's important that whoever you ask to be a mentor, and again, you can be mentored from afar too, right? You can read books, you can, listen to tapes, you can watch some people's videos or whatever. There's a lot of different ways to be mentored, for lack of a better word. But when you do, put that courageous moment out there and ask for mentorship, just make sure that you are going to be worthy of their time. And that means you're going to be focused. You're going to do what they tell you to do the first time, because a good mentor is not going to give you a second time. So, and just be, So I'll stop there because I could go on and on with that one.
We're going to. So let's say I'm looking for a mentor and we're in COVID. I interact with people solely virtually. And I'm looking for a mentor that's going to be tough on me and tell me where I'm failing, where I need to work. But that doesn't come through from what I see of you on LinkedIn, because that's not necessarily the image that you want to project, because you're not advertising that you're looking for a mentee. Right. So if I know you, but not really well, what kind of questions should I be asking you or someone else that I'm looking at for a mentor to drill down on that? Because that's kind of a hard thing to say. Hey, Stephanie, are you going to tell me when I'm really messing up?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So are you, well, you know what, actually, Kali, that's a great question. Right. Yeah, so exactly. If you're asked, because I want to make sure I'm answering the question that you're asking. So let me just repeat it back and you poke holes if I'm misunderstanding. Is your question to me, when you're looking for a mentor and you're having the conversation with the mentor and you want to find out the style of that mentor, is that what you're asking me?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
I'm going to add in the virtual element of let's do this all online.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, the question, you hit it on the head perfectly. You ask it just like that, right? So when you think about, hey, if you've mentored people, and here's what I will tell you as well. Let's do the flip side. Someone who's used to mentoring people, you probably won't have to really ask that question, right? Because they're going to just tell you like, okay, listen, happy to spend some time with you. Tell me what you're trying to get accomplished. Why haven't you gotten it accomplished now? Why do you think it's this time now that it's going to be a little bit different? It could be a whole lot of questions, right? Most experienced mentors are going to you're going to get the sense on the front end, right? Because they're not going to want to spend a whole lot of time if there's not a compatibility there, if you will. Yeah. But let's say you can't get that sense. Maybe you're just doing emails, let's say, just to get this conversation started. Then there's nothing wrong, Kali, with asking the question exactly how you asked it. I'd love to know about your mentorship style. And so, I'd love to know, and you could say, is it direct? Is it, and you can kind of couch it however, based on what works best for you. Because here's another part to that thing. And this is why I love this question. My style is direct. My personality is direct. I like a direct conversation. Now, what I've learned over the years is not everybody works well with that, right? Some people are actually, they prefer a little bit more, perhaps, massaging and the softening of the language and things like that. Both are fine. Nobody's right or wrong. It just means what your style is, right? And so it's important that when you are looking for mentors that you do actually have that initial understanding, so that there's no hurt feelings or no unnecessary frustration, because then that doesn't do anybody any good, right? So be okay with, Kali, asking a question exactly how you just said it. Nothing wrong with that.
Very good.
You want to practice with me? Go ahead, practice. Ask me that question in the Kali kind of way, but I'm going to let you practice on me.
Okay. Well, Stephanie, I feel like at work, I sometimes don't do a great job of talking with my subordinates and helping them walk through problems because I'm just really busy and I I have a hard time taking that time to really explain something. So if I'm working with you as my mentor, I kind of want to get a sense of how you might work with me to develop that part of my leadership.
So do you see that as a weakness?
I see it as probably my primary weakness.
Okay. So have you struggled with this your whole life?
Yes, I'm
So what
very
if,
much to the point, and I have to slow down and say, I need to tell this person good morning. I need to just pause.
so let me ask you this, knowing that you've struggled with it your whole life, knowing that it's a weakness that you have, why hasn't it been fixed?
I am hyper aware of it and I've been working on fixing it, but it's just so ingrained of, you know, here's the next thing, here's 100 emails left in my inbox that I just forget. It's like I have to continually pinch myself of like, okay, we're in this conversation, we have to slow down.
Got it. So the key of that is nothing changes if nothing changes. So I'm going to go back to my question. You know it's a problem. You've had it as a problem. Tell me 3 things you've done to fix that problem. Now, I'm going to stop. I don't want you to do that, right? But I want you to see that's my coaching style, right? It's very direct. We're not going to spin a whole lot because I'm not going to let you talk around it, right? Because you still didn't answer my question. So that's why people think they want to be mentioned by me. You really don't, people, right? Don't send me a LinkedIn. Want me to nope. You really don't want to do this. But that's the type of conversation that has to be had when you're looking to develop people. Right now, based on the person, I may soften it a little bit, but for the sake of this conversation, I just wanted to show it as an example. So that's why I was pretty direct to it. But that's the kind of stuff that's important, because really, when you think about getting to that next level, to the point earlier that Gabby made, the 2 of you are actually killing it, right? Like you're already established, and so, but to go to a different level requires a different skill set. Bigger level, bigger devil, right? And so you have to know how to not be okay with the excuse of, I got a lot of emails, like the whole planet has emails, right? So you have to be more disciplined if you want to get to the top of your game.
I think that's
I still love you, Kali.
I think that's a really good example of what that kind of mentorship can look like. Because we can talk about this, we can read about it in a book, but until you see, okay, what are the 3 things you've done? That makes it very real compared to, well, we're just going to have a direct conversation now.
Right. And the reason why I stopped you and said, I don't want you to answer that question is more so because we were just doing it as a role play. But then also when you ask someone that question, so you can do this with your people, right? 99% of the time, they cannot tell you 3 things that they've done. And yet this is a lifelong problem, right? So anyways, again, I could go on and on with that one, but I think you got the gist of it.
So one of our attendees had a very interesting question. We've spoken on good leadership and how to be an effective leader. Now, as a young professional, how do we deal with someone who we know is not the best or the most functional leader?
Oh, that's a good one. I can tell you, I've had, several leaders throughout my career, some good, some bad. Some horrible. And so, but what you want to do is you want to make up your mind that regardless of the leader, that you're going to learn something from them. I can tell you, I've learned just as much from horrible and bad leaders as I have from really good leaders. And so it's a mindset.
How do you spot a bad leader?
How would you spot it? Well, I think, it's funny. I believe that you will spot it right away, right? You can, and this is why, let's go back. That's a great question, Gabby. This is why when you're doing the interview, in the interview process, you have to ask those questions. Exactly. Yeah, it all roads go back there, right? To questions, right? and because that's really important, because if in fact you ask the question about, tell me your proudest success story as a leader, tell me, how you tend to develop people, tell me, all those type of questions that you can come up with. If they can't tell you a success story, Well, there's flag number one, right? Because that means you've got a leadership position, but you actually have not developed a leader. You don't have the experience in doing it, or maybe you don't care about doing it. So all of those things on the front end really matter. Now, let's go fast forward back to your question, because assuming that perhaps maybe they're working now and the boss isn't that great, and so they're trying to figure out, how am I going to get through this? The one thing I would just reiterate is you really can learn from anybody. Boss, baby, doesn't matter. You can learn from anybody, but it does have to be a mindset that you're intentional about what's your takeaway when interacting with that person. The other thing that you can learn is you're probably going to run across a person like that again in your future. They may or may not be your boss. Maybe maybe they'll be a colleague, right? Or something like that. So it's important that you learn how to handle that personality anyway. The truth of the matter is healthy confrontation is really important on any team. And so being able to hold your own, being able to still articulate, your needs or your desires or what have you, is really important regardless of the people that you're dealing with. So I would say shift the attention. It's not so much about the boss as much as it's about you. What are the lessons I'm going to learn? How am I going to grow from this? And how am I going to use this for where I'm going next? And then also that kind of usually bad behavior challenges you to get out of that situation. So learn what you got to learn, right? And then when it's time for you to move on, it's time for you to move on. But don't stay with, especially if the boss is abusive or something verbally or what have you, don't stay in that predicament. Take the lesson that you got to learn from it and then move on. And also, use that as something that you won't do when you're leading teams and people and things of that nature.
Yes. And I've felt, I've really embraced the question recently, especially living more of a gratitude mindset. At the end of every terrible interaction or difficult interaction, I always say to myself, at least, thank you for helping me, because now that's going to stick with me and I'm going to learn how not to treat somebody in the future, or how not to handle that situation.
Absolutely. And, let's say you have a boss, because sometimes too, right? So let's do the reverse. Sometimes it may seem like the boss is bad. Because maybe just from a compatibility, perspective. And so what you can do as well is, unless you're going to quit tomorrow, which I would not recommend that to anybody, is you've got to figure out how to work with that boss. And so again, going back to questions. So let's say you have a boss that you feel like nothing you do is right? Or, they told you to do something, you did it to your best of ability, and then they're upset because it didn't meet their expectations. And so those types of things, what you can do is, instead of being upset. I shouldn't say instead of, because obviously you're going to be upset if they've voice their displeasure, if you will. But use it as an opportunity, using questions, right? Getting better with questions to actually ask them. So I'm using this as an example. Something that you could say could be, hey, listen, you know what? I know that it seems like the work that I just provided, you're disappointed and maybe even frustrated. So that I could grow, help me understand how I could have done this better. Right. And so now all of a sudden it's a different dialogue versus the person's going, this is not what I was looking for. And then go back and do it again. And then you take it and you're like, and you don't really know, like, well, what am I doing differently? You just don't know. So be okay with learning how to ask questions, even though those are tough conversations. But, part of growth is actually being able to have those tough conversations and then to learn from them.
And I would add, being relatively new to a formal management role, that when someone who reports to me asks that question, that's like a wonderful moment where you realize that even if they didn't deliver what you wanted, they care enough about it that they're following up and they want to do better next time.
Yeah, that's powerful, Kali. That's 100% right. You're spot on. Most people come to work wanting to do a good job. And so if we always have that in mind, then it changes how we approach them, right? And the truth of the matter is too, sometimes people could have a bad day, it had nothing to do with you, right? You just happen to walk in at the wrong time. And so, and now all of a sudden you're carrying that thinking, my boss hates me, kind of thing. And it really had nothing to do with you. Maybe the boss had, something going on at home or what have you. So questions are always the key to most difficult problems.
So we have another question from the audience. So in that kind of situation, maybe you're the type of person that just takes that really personally. And that's, even though maybe it's not really what about you or what you did, it's just really sitting badly with you. And you touched on being brave enough to have a difficult conversation. How do you go about doing that in a way that you're not going to make the situation worse with your boss, and do it in a way where you can actually have a conversation and it doesn't feel like an attack or like you're picking on someone?
Yeah. So one, it's about the questions, right? So because there's two different ways to ask questions. So if anybody on here is in sales, they know there's the open probe question and the closed probe question. And so asking questions to start with who, what, when, where, and why are really important, because you don't want to ask a question that requires somebody to give you a one-word answer, because those kind of questions put people on the defense, right? And now all of a sudden you do have that opportunity for things to go south really quickly. But if you're asking a question that's really open and allows the person to express, their viewpoint, then that's going to be really helpful. The second thing is too, you have to, not only do you have to be brave enough to ask the question, you have to be brave enough to get ready for the answer, because it may not be an answer that you're looking for or hoping for or even planning on, right? Because it's good to ask the question. Let's just use the example of, I can see, going back to the other example, I can see you're frustrated, didn't quite meet your expectations. Can you help me understand what were you expecting? How did I miss the boat? And what would you recommend that I do differently? So let's just say it's something like that. And let's say the person then gives you an answer that just takes you off guard, right? Now what you have to do is, instead of becoming defensive, because you asked the question, you got to receive it. You got to put your big girl pants on, right? Or your big boy pants on, and you got to stand in that uncomfortableness to learn the lesson. Because if you want to grow to that next level, the next level is most likely going to be that tougher level. And so how do you not sit with it? Which I guess is the question from the audience. How do you not take it in and really probably think about it, for the rest of the month, right? In regards to disappointing somebody. That takes time. And a lot of it also is, I don't have an answer for that. It really just takes time. But what you have to realize though is, no matter what, if you're asking to be developed and grow, change is hard, growth is hard, and it all takes time. And so as long as you know that the person's most likely not doing it to be malicious or mean or hurt your feelings, but you asked the question and they spoke their truth. And so now it's up to you how you're going to handle it and what you're going to do with it. So I wish I could say oh, just do this and it will all go away and it's easier. What I will tell you is, the more times you ask those honest questions and you listen and sit and whatnot, sit with it, then the easier it becomes as you go up your career. Because now let's go back to the example. Let's say the person says, I need you to do this. I felt like you didn't prepare for that, whatever, right? Whatever they tell you. So you take that away. And then what I would do is actually follow that up with a phone call or email or whatever. Just want to let you know, I took to heart what you said, really thought about, and then you're reiterating back to them what they said, so they know you heard them, right? You didn't just ask the question because you wanted to ask it and then you're going to do it the same way next time, but that you really are mindful and intentional about how to do better with it. So it's a process. So you reiterate it back as a thank you. And then now you start doing the work that shows them, not only did I hear you, not only did I thank you, but here's how I've actually implemented and executed on it. And so again, all that takes time. But what you'll find, and Kali, you hit on it earlier, you do that with a leader, a good leader or a bad leader, unless there's some dysfunctional problem going on, right? They're going to actually start to extend that olive branch and now want to continue to help you succeed, whether it be in your career or at that job or what have you, because those kind of people are far and few. Yeah.
Stephanie, I wanted to touch with you just because we're ending pretty soon. We need some advice from you, from someone who's been in the industry. Sure. What can we do as young professionals to get away from being stagnant and continue the process even during these times, in the next weeks, months, in the next year? A little bit of a timeline. We'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, there's no question this has been an unbelievable year. And so, I know a lot of people are, watching different webinars and trainings and, getting certifications and all kinds of stuff. So it's great. I mean, all that is good stuff. And I would say keep that up. The thing that I would say though is something that people underestimate. So let's say, let's look at 2021. What I would really suggest is you plan some thinking time. And a lot of times people don't think that thinking time is important, but it's really important just to kind of cut the noise, cut the clutter, and just spend some time with yourself to figure out what is it that you want 2021 to look like for you, right? So that's the first thing, because you have to be clear. And a lot of times people are looking for, big grandiose, because I get this question a lot. And I wish I could tell you, I'm going to tell you something you've never heard before, but usually it's the same stuff that we tell people because it works, right? So for 2021, I'll tell you what I tend to do. The January 1st, no matter what I'm doing career-wise, January 1st is my thinking time. So I think about the year that passed, and I think about the year ahead. So what do I want that year to look like for me? Now, when I was in sales, it was a very specific thought. How much money do I want to make this year, right? As a mom, I may think about certain things. As a wife, I may think about certain things. So whatever that is for you, take the time to think. First thing. Second thing is, once you've thought about that, actually write it down. Now, I'm not a person on a personal level who says you should write down a 1-year plan about it. In business, you absolutely want to have plans because it has to do with budget and forecasting and so on and so forth. But on your personal life, it's okay to just write a 60-day plan, right? And I called it an action plan. It's not just a plan, because plans get a little plans eventually they look like this, right? Everybody has a plan and then you end up dusting it off. You never did anything with it. So don't do that. But write it down. So you've thought about it. And now in 60 days, what are the things I want to do? Right. And every single day, other than, if you want to take the weekends off, whatever, let's say it's a career thing. Every single day, what am I doing? What are those steps that I'm doing for the next 60 days towards what I want my 2021 to look like? And have pivotal key points. So every single day, it doesn't have to be 10 things you're doing, right? I would say no more than 3 things you're trying to get accomplished, but write it down. And then every day kind of check in with yourself as you're closing out your day. Now, for me, doesn't mean this works for everybody. For me, I'm all about A, B, and C. If you look at any of my to-dos, it will have an A list, a B list, and a C list. C means, you know what, it's on there. I probably won't get done today. A means I can't close out my day until it gets done. B means if I have all my A's done, I can start working on my B's. But every day, what are you doing towards that goal of 2021 of what you want to have for your future? And then have a check and balance where you're checking in with yourself every 2 weeks. Are you on track? You're off track. If you're off track, have that hard conversation with yourself as to why. Same thing Kali and I did on a role playing. You have to have those kind of conversations really direct with yourself, no nonsense, no BS, to figure out, why am I off track? And how am I going to get back on track? So by that time that 60 days is done, you've accomplished the 1 or 2 things you were attempting to do. But do it in bite-sized chunks. You have to write it down. That's the first thing. If you don't write it down, don't even waste your time. You have to write it down and put it someplace where you can see it all the time. So it's a constant reminder and a constant refresher. When I was selling back in the day, you could go into my bathroom, and on my bathroom mirror in lipstick would be my goal. Everybody would like, because it was in my face all the time. If I was putting my makeup on, I was brushing my teeth, whatever, it's always there. I don't do that now. Obviously, obviously the role has changed, right? But I will tell you, I do have my goals always written down, and I know exactly what it is I'm trying to get accomplished, and I'm holding myself accountable to it. And sometimes I'm hitting it and I'm like killing it and I'm crushing it. And sometimes I'm like, Chung, like, okay, that's not good. You suck, right? Right? And I'm backing up. So be sure to visualize it, understand it, what it is, write it down, and then hold yourself accountable to actually have the discipline to execute on it. And then when those 60 days are up, celebrate, because hopefully you've accomplished some things, and then do the next 60 days. I would not tell you do 365 days worth of planning, because that gets overwhelming and then people do nothing, right? Because just the thought becomes like just paralyzing. So just break it up in bite-sized chunks. That would be my advice.
Love it. Wonderful. Thank you.
Perfect. Of course.
Tangible.
Of course.
Well, if you've enjoyed this conversation, I know Gabby and I have, and Stephanie, we could talk all day to you, but you have a company to go run. So we'd encourage everybody to join Women in Aviation YoPro Connect and the Aero Club Runway Program for more programming like this. You should also, if you're not already, follow Stephanie on LinkedIn and Wheels Up too. Both of those profiles have great content that they're putting out. And as you know, Stephanie's all over the industry and you'll just love what she's posting. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. This webinar is recorded and you'll be able to access it after this. So share it with your friends and colleagues who weren't able to make it today. And we've really, really enjoyed talking with you, Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Of course, this was fun. Thank you, ladies, and keep making us proud out there. You're doing fantastic. You're doing fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye now.
Take care.